Walt Disney World is a tribute to the philosophy and life of Walter Elias Disney, and to the talents, the dedication, and the loyalty of the entire Disney organization that made Walt Disney's dream come true. May Walt Disney World bring joy and inspiration and new knowledge to all who come to this happy place, a magic kingdom where the young at heart of all ages can laugh and play and learn together. Those were the dedication words of the Magic Kingdom on October 1st, 1971. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Disney World in Minecraft. This is mcmagic.us. It is a server in the game Minecraft that has created Disney World on a one-to-one scale. In the past, I've done tours of the Magic Kingdom. At that time, I was pretty new to Let's Playing, and I figured it's been a while. It's time to update this tour. It's time to show off some of the new fantastic builds that the amazing crew over at MC Magic have put together. And on top of that, it's time to add a layer of depth to the tour. And this tour is going to be totally interactive. What that means is, throughout the tour, when I pass by certain attractions, you might see an annotation pop up in a corner. And what that annotation will link you to is that attraction-specific Minecraft Disney World episode that I've made. And each episode is usually 5 to 10, maybe 15 minutes of that attraction's history. It's a way of giving each attraction its own 15 minutes in the spotlight and going into the history, while here it's going to be more of a general overview. So without further ado, let's dive right in. We're here at the Magic Kingdom. Like I said, opened October 1st, 1971. Unfortunately, Walt Disney never lived to see the Magic Kingdom open. He passed away years earlier. His brother Roy sort of took up the reins and made sure that the first stage of the Florida project, which was Disney World, which was then later renamed to Walt Disney World, was finished. And it is essentially a Floridian version of Disneyland in California, but with some improvements and changes. Now, why does Disney World exist is a good question, I think, worth asking and answering here at Main Street, where we first walk into the parks. And it's a number of different reasons. So Walt, for one, wanted to greatly improve on the Disneyland concept. At the time, he had bought some limited land in California, and the problem was, once the word was out, land was very expensive. They bought what they could afford to, and the problem was, outside of those gates, they really had no control. So a bunch of seedy motels would pop up, and other businesses that, in general, Disney just couldn't control. And Walt was really upset with that, the idea that you could look over to the side and, beyond a castle, see maybe a sign for a building that they couldn't really control. So what he really wanted was a lot of, space to play around in. And on the other end of that inspiration, he was working on something called Epcot. And the whole history of Epcot is really worth talking about in the tour of Epcot, but the short of it was he was planning to build an actual functional, real city of the future that people would work and live in, to act as sort of a model for the rest of the world, to show them how pre-designed cities could really work out and how it could make the world a better place. And so he needed space for that as well. And so what he did was, in secret, bought up all this land in Central Florida under different names, so they didn't know it was Disney. And by the time they had so much land that it's over twice the size of Manhattan, they announced it, and there was going to be this big project called Epcot, and there was going to be a theme park, its own version of Disneyland, and then unfortunately he passed away, and the Disney company decided that stage one would be to build the Magic Kingdom. So here we are at the front of the Magic Kingdom. Also interesting to note that this is actually the second floor of the theme park. Underneath, and this is one of the things that Walt really wanted to change from Disneyland, is a set of utility corridors, otherwise known as the utilidors. And the reason for that is because, as the story goes, he was sitting in Tomorrowland one day in Disneyland. He would always visit the parks, and he saw a cowboy walking through Tomorrowland to just get to where, he needed to go. And that really upset him because it sort of ruined the immersion of being in Tomorrowland. And so this was a concept that would allow all of the Disney World employees to get from A to B without ever being seen. So characters can move around and other staff could move around, and wouldn't hurt the immersion at all. Now, the reason that this is the second floor is because Florida has a very shallow waterbed, and so as a result, they couldn't really dig down too deeply without running into construction problems. So what they decided to do was just build up and they made the utilidors the first level, and then they filled in all of the areas in between with dirt that they were pulling out of the Seven Seas Lagoon, which was a man-made lagoon. And then on top of that, they placed the Magic Kingdom. And here in the Magic Kingdom, this is where you sort of get your first glance of the theme park. Now, I'm going to go back to the tunnels real quick because I think it's worth noting that the design here is very elaborate and very interesting. You know, we might take advantage of this and just assume that this is the way it always was, but originally, and going off of sort of carnival design, a theme park would have multiple entrances, so you wouldn't have too many crowds in one area, and it would just go right in. But he wanted one central entrance so that you'd get one specific sort of experience going in. And it splits off into these two side tunnels very purposefully. And that is to sort of, you know, guide your experience when first seeing Cinderella's castle. And so I can't see it from here, and a guest wouldn't really be able to see it from here. And really, it's just as you turn onto Main Street that you get the first view. I believe here in Minecraft, the sort of view distance is just a little too short, so we don't see it. But, you know, in the real Disney, you would see it. And this would be the main walkway to get to sort of the hub. And the original Main Street was sort of inspired by Walt's hometown of Marceline, Missouri. He only lived there for a couple of years when he was very young, but it had a very lasting impression on him. And so as a result, you know, it was something he always remembered growing up. And what's really cool is the windows here up on Main Street are all etched with names of Imagineers and people that were very important to Disney's history, including Walt Disney's father, Elias, who is a carpenter. He's got his name up there too, and they were all for fake businesses. And Walt even has his own name, and it's up here above the ice cream shop. And the reason it's over here is so that his name is always facing Cinderella's castle. And once you move beyond Main Street, you end up entering the hub, and that's where Cinderella's castle is. Interesting fact about Cinderella's castle, not a single brick used in creating Cinderella's castle, even though it looks like it's made of stone. It is also just a couple of feet short of the federal height limit before a building in Florida needs to put a warning light on top of the structure to warn airplanes that are low-flying aircraft. And the reason they did that is because they didn't really want to put that light up there because, you know, it would, once again, break immersion to put that sort of light up there. It just sort of reminds you that you're in the real world. So, you know, that sort of detail is very indicative of how much work Walt Disney Imagineering puts into maintaining immersion. You know, the fact that they will decide how tall a structure is just to avoid putting a single light on top that, you know, I think another company might overlook. The hub itself is very important because this is another interesting design progress that you see in the theme park world. You know, the original thought was that you would just have this park that sort of loops around and touches on all of these different places. But by having this hub and spoke method, which is called that way because if you look at it from above, it looks like a central hub and all the spokes of a wheel sticking out, you can pick which land you're going to. In the original Disney plans, the idea was that you would go to, like, say, Tomorrowland over here, and then when you were done, you would come back to the hub and pick another land. But they found that for crowd reasons, it was a lot easier to then connect all the lands so that you could, you know, radiate out from the hub and then just sort of go around in whichever direction you needed to. We're going to actually head into Tomorrowland now, which is one of the 5 lands in the Magic Kingdom. And Tomorrowland's dedication reads, "A vista into a world of wondrous ideas, signifying man's achievement. A step into the future with predictions of constructed things to come. Tomorrow offers new frontiers in science, adventure, and ideals. The atomic age, the challenge of outer space, and the hope for a peaceful, unified world." And that's really what Tomorrowland was all about when it first started. Tomorrowland was, you know, Disney's way of saluting the future and dreaming about the future. And what's interesting is that Tomorrowland very much evolved over the years. I mean, you look now here at Monsters, Inc., Laugh Floor, Stitch's Great Escape, and you don't really get the same sense of what Tomorrowland used to be. Tomorrowland used to be all about what could happen tomorrow. Tomorrowland today is more of a land that celebrates what we used to think the future would be like, and it sort of celebrates that sort of Norman Rockwell 50s era look into the future. So on your right here, you have Monsters, Inc. Laugh Floor, where you have like a little comedy show. But before that, it was home of The Timekeeper, which starred Robin Williams and Rhea Perlman and was all about time travel. And on the left here, you have Stitch's Great Escape, which is sort of like a little sit-down immersive show where Stitch sort of breaks out of his little containment and runs amok. And this was actually preceded by Extraterrestrial Alien Encounter, which was a pretty terrifying ride. It was the same concept. It was a sit-down experience with an alien breaking loose, but it was pretty scary. An interesting history of Extraterrestrial Alien Encounter was that it was originally intended to be themed to Alien, the actual franchise Alien, with Ridley Scott's movie with Sigourney Weaver. They had achieved the rights to it, but because they didn't end up using it for Alien Encounter, what they ended up doing was putting an alien scene inside the Great Movie Ride in Hollywood Studios. And that's why, even though Hollywood Studios, all the movies are like either Disney or MGM, that's the sort of one standout that isn't either. And it's because they had the rights and they had to use it. Over here, you have Buzz Lightyear's Space Ranger Spin, which is sort of like a spiritual precursor to Toy Story Midway Mania. You sort of sit in this car and you have a little laser gun and you end up shooting all these aliens, you know, the minions of Zurg. And I call it a precursor to Toy Story Midway Mania because it was an interactive ride. And it was one of the few very early interactive rides. And Midway Mania, of course, is a 3D ride that is very similar in style. Now, the two attractions that used to be here were Delta's Dream Flight, and then before that was If You Had Wings. And what's interesting about those two attractions were, one, they are pretty clearly commercials for both of the companies that sponsored it, Delta and Southwest Airlines. What's also interesting is that when Disney World opened, it worked on a similar ticket book system as Disneyland, which is that you would pay to get into the parks, but then you would also pay for tickets that you would use to get on specific rides. It was sort of one of the remnant parts of the carnival system that carried over for a long time. And those attractions were classed differently based on, you know, their sort of complexity and excitement. And you had A tickets, which were sort of the low end, and then you had E tickets, which were the high end. And we still use that vernacular today. Whenever there's a major ride opening, you'll often hear Imagineers and promotional material consider it an e-ticket attraction. So if you've ever heard that term and you're wondering where it came from, that's where. And If You Had Wings was one of the few free attractions at the Magic Kingdom. So it was sort of the trade-off for the fact that it was a little less immersive and a little more of a blatant sort of commercial for the airlines. But the trade-off there was, yeah, it was free. So you got to ride it as many times as you wanted, which is exactly what I guess the sponsors wanted you to do. Now here we have the People Mover, which we're going to go ahead and try and ride. The People Mover has roots in Epcot. This was actually designed to be sort of like a transportation system of the future. Oh, there's the car. And this was something Walt wanted to implement in Epcot, the city. He had a vision that Epcot, the city, would not make use of any sort of automobiles. There would be roads underneath the city that would allow goods to enter, and it would allow visitors to come in and leave. But the idea is once you got into the city of Epcot, you would be using like transportation methods such as the monorail or the People Mover to sort of get around. And the People Mover is just sort of this idea that you just hop on and it moves at a pretty decent pace for like a neighborhood, and you just sort of hop off wherever you need to hop off. And they ended up putting it here in the Tomorrowland, which was fitting because it was sort of like a transportation method of the future. And what it does is it sort of gives you a tour of Tomorrowland. It goes through a bunch of attractions. Most notably, it goes through Space Mountain, the roller coaster. And this is actually one of the better ways, if you're really lucky, to catch a glimpse of Space Mountain with the lights on, because they'll often turn off, they'll stop letting people in Space Mountain if the ride closes and they need to turn the lights on, but they don't stop the TTA. So as a result, you know, you might be lucky and get to go through and get a peek of the ride. Now, what's also really cool is right over here. Now, in the real Disney, what you'd be looking at is actually a scale model of Progress City, which was sort of like Walt's original idea for Epcot. And that was actually something that was in the post-show of the Carousel of Progress, another attraction we're going to take a look at shortly. And it was much, much larger than what you actually end up seeing in Disney World. They ended up not bringing all of it over and setting it up, but it was this beautiful detailed scale model of a futuristic city. And it's also fitting to put it here, considering that this is a transportation method that was meant to be used in Epcot, the city. Now here we're about to enter one of the most famous roller coasters, definitely in Disney World, possibly in the world, and that is Space Mountain. Now what's really cool about Space Mountain, besides being like one of the first indoor roller coasters, is that it's actually the oldest operating roller coaster in the state of Florida. It was an idea that Walt had after the Matterhorn to do sort of an indoorsy space coaster. However, the technology wasn't really there at the time and couldn't really put it into action, so it ended up getting shelved, and it wasn't until long after Walt had passed away and Disney World was already in operation for a while that Space Mountain came to be. And what's really cool is, as you can see right here, is if your timing's right, while you're passing by, you actually get to see a couple of coaster riders on their way up to the top. Now what's interesting is that this coaster is actually really not that fast, but because it's in the dark and you cannot easily perceive which direction you're about to go in, it creates this sensory illusion that you're going much faster than you are. And recently, when they refurbished it, they covered up the queue area, which was a source of a lot of light leaks, and as a result, the actual ride itself became darker, and so there was this perception that it became faster or more wild, when in reality, the track didn't really change much itself. It's just because you couldn't see as much, it became harder to tell what you were about to do, and it just made it feel like it was a lot faster. And of course, MC Magic has done a wonderful job of refurbishing Space Mountain themselves to make it a lot more immersive on the Minecraft side of things, as you could tell from the details here. So coming off the People Mover and across the way, we have the Carousel of Progress, which is one of my favorite attractions here in Tomorrowland. The Carousel of Progress is one of the few rides that has a history that predates Disney World. It was actually an attraction for the 1964's World's Fair. Disney at the time had been asked to create a bunch of attractions for the World's Fair, and rather than turning it down because he had Disneyland to deal with and Epcot on his mind, he took the job because what he had done, which is very clever, is he wrote in into the contract that he gets to keep the attractions when they're done and bring them back to his park. So the way he saw it, a company was paying him to research and develop these rides that he would get to later use, and that was one of them. It was developed for GE, and it was all about, it was like a 4 or 5 scene, if you count the beginning, a 5 scene show about progress throughout the turn of the century. And what's great is when it was sponsored by GE, you would see all these GE appliances throughout that turn of the century. And what's funny is the original theme song was The Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow. However, GE requested that it be changed. They were afraid that the lyrics, it's a great big beautiful tomorrow, would convince consumers that they didn't need to buy all these great, fantastic, and futuristic appliances until tomorrow or the next day or whenever the future arrived. So the song was rewritten, and for a while it ran, and it was called Now Is the Time, because they wanted you to feel like now is the time to get all of these great GE products. And they were both written by the Sherman Brothers, but it was eventually switched back to the original Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow. And it was later narrated by Gene Shepard, who does the voiceover in A Christmas Story. And it was brought from the World's Fair to Disneyland and then was later brought over here to Disney World. Now, what I was just walking through here is the Tomorrowland Speedway, also known as Autopia, out in the California. And it's very interesting because it's a cars on tracks ride. You get in the little go-karts and you're on the tracks and you drive around. And a lot of people wonder why such an attraction is in Tomorrowland. It's not very futuristic. But you have to understand, when the ride was originally developed, especially Autopia in like the 50s, 60s, the concept of an interstate highway system was actually really new and novel. And it was, in a way, futuristic. So it sort of had its place there. Now, as we leave Tomorrowland, we head into Fantasyland, and here the dedication reads, "Here is a land of imagination, hopes, and dreams. In this timeless land of enchantment, the age of chivalry, magic, and make-believe are reborn, and fairy tales come true. Fantasyland is dedicated to the young and the young at heart, to those who believe that when you wish upon a star, your dreams do come true." And that is also a very fitting dedication because Disney World as a whole was designed to be for, as he puts it, the young and the young at heart. And we're here walking around the Alice in Wonderland teacups, And this is actually an attraction that has a home in many of the Disney parks. Let's see if we can ride it. Yes. Wait, that's a block.
Let me in. No, goodbye.
There we go. And it is like your typical sort of spinning saucer ride where you sit in it and you get to turn the wheel and spin it around. Interesting fact, this is one of the few that are covered. The one in Disneyland, California is uncovered, so the ride can't operate in the rain. But because, you have Central Florida weather and you have a lot of rain during certain periods of the year, they had to cover it up and gives people a nice break from the sun. Now, another thing that's very interesting about Fantasyland is that despite the fact that Walt Disney really disliked carnivals, he really thought that they were unsafe, they were dirty, they weren't great experiences. That's sort of what he wanted to prove wrong, is that you could do a park that did all of that stuff right. He really did like dark rides, and Fantasyland, which has probably, I think, some of the most of the original rides from, Disneyland when it opened, has a lot of dark rides, talking about Snow White's Scary Adventure and rides like that, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. And they're all dark rides because they're inside. You're sort of going through on this track and you've got all these different set pieces. And I think they were sort of the most, core elements of Disneyland when it started, because that's where you see the most direct relation to animated films. And Disney had this habit of often pulling people from different departments of the Walt Disney Company and putting them elsewhere. So they would get a background artist from animations and they would get them working on set design for different attractions, because he had this real knack for seeing talent in people that people themselves might not have seen. And anytime you read a interview or hear some sort of back and forth between an Imagineer, they'll often bring that up and they'll mention how they were pulled to do something that they were totally not used to and not, ready to do, and they would find them in themselves this talent that they didn't know they had, but apparently Walt somehow did. This was actually a recent home of an expansion called the New Fantasyland expansion. There are some rides there I haven't done episodes on yet. I try to focus on the history of some attractions, and that's really hard to do when some of the attractions' histories are less than a year old. But here is an attraction with a history that is much older than a year, and it features a song that is either famous or infamous, depending on how you want to look at it, and that's It's a Small World. Now, It's a Small World, like Carousel of Progress, was an attraction developed for the 1964 World's Fair. It was for the UNICEF Pavilion. And what's interesting about it is the song we know today by the Sherman Brothers again, which is, It's a Small World, was originally going to be the national anthems of all of the countries involved in It's a Small World. However, that proved to be quite noisy, as you would expect. And Walt decided that we needed to have a song that could be played in different languages that would sound similar, but you could have these different variations that sort of adapted to the different cultures of the world and would be very memorable. And the Sherman Brothers took all that direction, and out came It's a Small World. The funny thing is, the song that they originally posed was a lot slower in pace than what we know today, and Walt thought it was a little too slow, so they paced it up, and that's the version we end up hearing. What's very funny about this attraction is, for all of the jokes that get poked at it for being sort of a torturous experience if you're not a fan of the song, this was actually a wildly successful pavilion over at the World's Fair. As we move out of Fantasyland, we move here into Liberty Square, and the dedication for Liberty Square, it's actually on a plaque at the entrance, and it says, "Past this gateway stirs a new nation waiting to be born. 13 separate colonies have banded together to declare their independence from the bonds of tyranny. It is a time when silversmiths put away their tools and march to the drums of a revolution. A time when gentlemen planters leave their farms to become generals. A time when the tradesmen leave the safety of their home to become heroes. Welcome to Liberty Square." There was, of course, no dedication from Walt himself for this. This is unique to Disney World, and that's because there is no Liberty Square in Disneyland. Instead, they have a New Orleans Square. But it's fitting that this place exists because Walt was very, very patriotic, and it totally makes sense that there would be an area devoted to sort of like his love of America. In fact, the reason why the first, human audio animatronic was Abraham Lincoln was because he had that sort of that patriotism. And of course, we're here on the queue for the Haunted Mansion. The Haunted Mansion's sort of an interesting attraction that has a lot of history about it, so there's not too much I could go into on this sort of tour. That is to say, what's really interesting is that this is sort of an attraction born from two sort of mentalities. And this was an attraction that Walt had plans for and was very involved with in the early stages of development, but of course it wasn't open until after he passed away. And what had happened is because these were the first years without Walt Disney, there was sort of a lack of guidance. And so you had these two camps of Imagineers. There was one side who wanted this to be like genuinely scary and an actual haunted mansion. And then you had the other side who wanted to be more lighthearted, goofy spooks that, the whole family can enjoy. And what you end up getting is an attraction that's a little bit of both, and that's why when you ride the Haunted Mansion, sort of at the beginning inside the mansion, it's very creepy, very scary, and then as you get out into the graveyard and they start singing, it's a lot more lighthearted and fun. This also offers the Hall of Presidents, which is famous for, one, being not the most exciting attraction, but two, being an attraction that gets updated whenever a new president is entered into office with their own audio animatronic. So it's got all of the presidents in there, and in Minecraft, it is represented by all of the block presidents. And there they are. And they all, well, not all of them, but a number of them will stand up and they have something to say, and it's basically this little sit-down show about, the history of America and the President of the United States. What's also interesting about Liberty Square is it's got a replica of the Liberty Bell, and it was actually made from a cast of the real Liberty Bell. And there was a rumor going around for a long time that it was like one of two replicas of the Liberty Bell made with that cast. But the truth is, it actually there are actually more of them out there. And now we move on to Frontierland. Frontierland. It is here that we experience the story of our country's past, the color, romance, and drama of frontier America as it developed from wilderness trails to roads, riverboats, railroads, and civilization. A tribute to the faith, courage, and ingenuity of our hardy pioneers who blazed the trails and made this progress possible. And as the dedication implies, that is all that Frontierland is all about. It is famous for Splash Mountain, for Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. These are two attractions that Walt really wasn't involved in at all. Splash Mountain, for as classic as it is, was not something that was around in Walt's days. Neither is Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. So originally there wasn't a whole lot here in Frontierland. Now, Tom Sawyer's Island was a big attraction piece at the time. Now, there was originally going to be a Western River Expedition, which was sort of like a expedition boat ride sort of attraction, but that ended up getting put on hold so that they could sort of quickly get Pirates of the Caribbean into Disney, and I'll sort of mention that in the when we get to it. But it was sort of put on hold, and then by the time it got picked back up, those plans had changed, and it had turned into what would become Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. Now, Splash Mountain was also an addition later on, and it's got sort of an interesting past because it is themed around a somewhat controversial film called The Song of the South, which you can't really get anymore because it's kind of got a heated past because it's seen as being pretty politically incorrect and a little bit racist. However, it was called Splash Mountain for a completely different reason. Mike Leisner, the new CEO at the time, had decided that synergy meant cross-promoting all of these different things, and so Splash Mountain was actually named Splash Mountain after the movie Splash by Ron Howard with Tom Hanks, and it was to sort of promote the movie, even though the ride itself has absolutely nothing to do with the movie. There's also the Country Bear Jamboree, which is basically a sit-down musical show with animatronic bears. Also interesting about it is if you go and sit down and watch the show, which you'd have no problem doing because it's not super popular these days, it seems to be a product of its time, which is to say it's got some songs in there that are pretty funny and not the kind of songs you would expect to get past some Disney approvals these days, yet it sort of flies under the radar because it is, like I mentioned, not the most popular attraction here at Walt Disney World. And now we're heading on into Adventureland. Now, one thing I really want to note that we've been seeing as we've been going across is that what Disney is fantastic at is blending all of these lands together. You know, we're going here from Adventureland to Frontierland, and it doesn't seem like too jarring of a shift. Because they are very careful about how they theme these different areas and these buffers, and you even have these sort of curves here so that, you know, you're curving around to enter into Adventureland. And same thing with Frontierland. As you see it progress, this end is more of the wilderness side of things, but as you move along, it becomes a little more civilized. That's where you get to the Country Bears, and that's how it sort of seamlessly segues into Liberty Square, which is sort of like the birth of America. So it's almost like a timeline you're walking along, with Adventureland all the way through to Liberty Square, and even Liberty Square to Fantasyland, which seems like it would be a pretty jarring change. You have more of the sort of architecture of like Pinocchio and tales like that sort of make it easier to blend into the sort of colonial designs of Liberty Square. Now, the dedication for Adventureland reads, "Here's adventure, here is romance, here is mystery. Tropical rivers silently flowing into the unknown. The unbelievable splendor of exotic flowers. The eerie sound of the jungle. With eyes that are always watching." And this is a very adventurous park. This is home to Pirates of the Caribbean. This is home to the Jungle Cruise, and this is home to the Tiki Room. Now, the Pirates of the Caribbean, it was interesting because it wasn't originally planned here for Walt Disney World. Now, Disney originally thought that this was an attraction that would be out of place in the Magic Kingdom, and the reason they thought that is because the Magic Kingdom's in Central Florida, which itself is not too far from the actual Caribbean, so they thought nobody would really want this fake sort of theme park Caribbean when the real one is just right there. But the popularity of Pirates of the Caribbean in Disneyland had led so many people to asking where the Pirates of the Caribbean was in Disney World that they eventually, like I mentioned earlier, put the Western River expedition that was designed by Mark Davis, and they put that aside so that they could put Pirates of the Caribbean in. And this, along with It's a Small World, are actually one of the few attractions that go down in elevation and go on the original level. And the reason that the two of them do that is because they are water rides. You're in a boat. Parts of Splash Mountain also do this because there's so much water involved and water is so heavy. They have it lowered down. So it's one of the few places where you as a guest can actually travel to the sort of first level of the Magic Kingdom. It's now dark out as they do their fireworks, and we're going to walk past the Tiki Room. Now, the Tiki Room is interesting because this was sort of the birthplace of sort of early animatronics. This is a show with a bunch of birds, and they sort of lend themselves to animatronics as a form because early animatronics did not move very naturally. They didn't flow a lot because you had that sort of quick jerkiness of the hydraulics moving and stopping, and that actually mimicked sort of the movement of a parrot really well. And Walt's original plans for the Tiki Room were that it was going to be a sit-down dinner show. However, that ended up being scrapped, and it ended up being a just sort of sit-down show that you'd be in and out of within about 10 minutes. Now, what's really cool about MC Magic, if you've never been here before, is even the attractions that aren't rides, they go through the effort. So, like, here we are in the Tiki show, and it will actually play through, as you can see in the HUD, all of the lines of the script. So you're actually like watching the show as it goes on. So you actually get a pretty realistic experience of the attractions. You have Aladdin's Magic Carpet Ride, which is sort of like Dumbo from Fantasyland, but with carpets. Probably, I would guess, was put in there to sort of alleviate a lot of the pressure that Dumbo had to get a lot of people in seats. And over here, you have the Jungle Cruise. Now, the Jungle Cruise is great because this is one of those rides that Walt also really had a part in. He was very excited about the prospect of getting people to see all these animals, but realistically, you couldn't have all these live animals, so you had all of these sort of robotic ones. And this was heavily inspired by the Humphrey Bogart film, The African Queen. What's really great about Disney's ingenuity is that even after the Animal Kingdom opened, which offered the real thing, real animals, and a real safari tour, rather than getting rid of this attraction, rather than letting it sit and sort of stagnate, they really heavied up on this focus of using sort of cheesy jokes, cheesy humor, and guides to sort of make it a different experience. So now you are no longer expected to be actually, excited about seeing these potential animals. Look at that. Isn't that awesome? But you were excited because you would have all these funny jokes that the tour guides would be telling. This is also home of the famous snack, the Dole Whip. You can get it right over here. And it's one of the few things you can pretty much exclusively find at Disney. So if you're ever in Disney, you should definitely go. And you have the Swiss Family Robinson Treehouse. And this sort of just loops you back around here out of Adventureland and into the hub. You have the Crystal Palace here, which is a restaurant, and it sort of brings you right back around to Main Street. And this is where they have fireworks every night, and they'll have the parade, and it's just a really great time. So that's just a really, really general overview of some of the stuff here at the Magic Kingdom. Like I said, if you want to know more about these attractions, all you have to do is go back and click on those annotations, or if you want, you could head over to the playlist for the Minecraft Disney World, where each episode goes into depth about the history of each attraction, so they all get their due time. I want to thank you all for watching. I do plan to do these for Epcot, for Hollywood Studios, and for the Animal Kingdom as well. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you had a great week. Whatever you're doing, make the most of it. Makes it that much better. And I hope to see you next time for the next Rob Plays That Game video. Bye, everybody.